Hi, welcome back. Our previous lesson was on determinant of price elasticity of demand. Today we'll be looking at demand elasticity and revenue. Now we know from our previous class that price elasticity of demand is how responsive quantity demanded is to changes in price. That is how much demand increases, decreases when price changes. And the formula to calculate price elasticity is percentage change in quantity divided by percentage change in price. Now, the revenue of firms is closely related to how elastic the demand curve is. From this formula of price elasticity, we can rewrite it to get percentage change in quantity demanded as the price elasticity of demand times the change in price. This means that firms can be able to predict how much quantity demand will change if they knew how elastic the demand curve is and the price of the good. So a firm can decide to increase or decrease price depending on how elastic the demand curve is to affect the quantity demanded. So let's see how price elasticity of demand relates with the revenue of firms. Producers can use the price elasticity of demand of their goods to forecast the likely consequences of any change in price. Example, if the price elasticity of a good is minus 0.2, the absolute value of this is 0.2, which is less than 1. This means that this good is inelastic. So you can project that if your price were to rise by 10%, so let's say if the price of a good changes by 10%, so percentage change in price is 10%. Producers can use this formula to project the change in quantity demand. So to see this, the change in quantity demand will simply be the price elasticity, which is negative 0.2 in this case, times the 10% increase in price, which is minus 2%. So what this means is that if a producer is selling a good with inelastic demand and they increase their price by 10%, they can project that consumers will reduce the quantity demand by 2%. In this example, we see that if the market price of a good, for example, apples, goes up by 10% and the good is inelastic with a price elasticity of demand of 0.2, the quantity demand will decrease by 2%. Now, what does this mean for profit? Remember that a firm's total revenue is calculated as the price times the quantity. So when prices increases, according to the law of demand, quantity will reduce. And if price reduced, according to the law of demand, quantity will increase. So because these two elements are moving in opposite direction, producers have to be very careful about how they change the price, because that will affect quantity, which will in effect affect their total revenue. So since a change in price leads to a change in quantity demand in the opposite direction, the impact on total revenue would depend on the relative magnitude of the two changes. The price elasticity of demand tells you whether the percentage change in price is larger than the percentage change in quantity demanded. When the price elasticity is inelastic, then the percentage change in quantity is smaller than the percentage change in price. But when the price elasticity is elastic, then the percentage change in quantity is bigger than the percentage change in price. Now, what we can infer from this is higher prices lead to less total revenue if demand is elastic, and higher prices lead to more total revenue if demand is inelastic. Now, let's use curves to explain what we mean by this. We know from our previous lessons that if demand is elastic, the demand curve is flatter. So this is our elastic demand curve. Now let's assume that the price of a good is P1 and the demand is Q1. Total revenue is calculated as the price of a good multiplied by the total quantity demand. So in this example, this shaded area becomes our total revenue. Let's call this total revenue 1. Now, if the price of this good were to increase to P2, if you trace this to your demand curve, quantity demand will also reduce from Q1 to Q2. Now, our new revenue will be this entire shaded area. What we see is that just by eyeballing this curve, you can see that TR1 is much bigger than TR2. This means that higher prices lead to less total revenue if demand is elastic. Now, to explain this further, we said total revenue equals price times quantity. If the demand is elastic, changes in price induces a bigger change in quantity demand. So when you increase the price of your good, quantity demand will reduce by a bigger proportion. So the final effect of multiplying price times quantity will be smaller than what you started with. For example, if you increase price by 20%, quantity demand will reduce by, let's say, 50%. So at the end, the producer is going to lose revenue by increasing the price. So if you're selling a good with elastic demand curve, it's best if you reduce prices to increase revenue. This is because a reduction in price is going to induce a bigger increase in quantity demanded, which will lead to higher revenue. Now let's look at the other case of inelastic demand. When a good has inelastic demand, the demand curve is steeper. So assuming we start from price P1 and quantity demand Q1, this shaded area now becomes our total revenue, which we can call TR1. Now, if the price were to increase to P2, quantity demand will reduce to Q2. You can see that the increase in price is bigger than the reduction in quantity demanded. The new revenue here is this shaded red area. Now, eyeballing this curve, you can see TR2 would be bigger than TR1. So in this case, higher prices lead to more total revenue if demand is inelastic. To explain this further, we know that total revenue is equal to price times quantity. So when demand is inelastic, when price reduces, quantity demand will increase, but not by a bigger proportion. Quantity demand will increase by smaller proportion as compared to the reduction in price. So this will lead to less total revenue. But if price were to increase, quantity demand will reduce, but by a smaller proportion. And when you multiply it, this will lead to higher total revenue. So if you're selling a good in which the demand is inelastic, it's better to increase prices to increase total revenue. But if you're selling a good in which the demand is elastic, then it's better to reduce prices in an attempt to increase total revenue. So this is all that we have on our lesson on price elasticity of demand and revenue. Our next lesson will be on other demand elasticities. If you enjoyed today's lesson, consider subscribing. Thank you.